Anyone who has spent an afternoon with a 4-year-old knows the game. Why is the grass wet? Because it rained. Why did it rain? Because the clouds got heavy. Why did the clouds get heavy? Because water evaporates from the ocean. Why does water evaporate? Because the sun heats it. Why does the sun? And at some point, every parent knows the moment you're gonna say, it just does. That's just how the world is. Now here's the thing. That answer isn't only for exhausted parents. It is eventually everyone's answer. Physics runs the chain back through chemistry, through particles, through fields, through the Big Bang, and then it stops. Every worldview, without exception, ends its chain of whys somewhere. Something at bottom just is. The atheist says, the universe just is. No reason. Rock bottom. The theist says God just is. And God explains the rest. And it's tempting to think that it's a stalemate. Two people shrugging in different places. Your brute fact versus mine. Pick your favorite. Chapter 4 of Richard Swinburne's The Existence of God says no. It's not a stalemate. There are rules, rational general rules, the same ones working scientists use every day for where you're entitled to stop asking why questions and where you're not. Some stopping points are earned. Others are just given up early. Today, where does explanation end? Let's get into it. So where are we in the series? Lecture 1, Swinburne's Strategy. The arguments for God are inductive. Each one raises the probability of theism. And the question is whether the cumulative case makes God's existence more probable than not. Lecture 2. There are two irreducible kinds of explanation. Scientific explanation, initial conditions plus laws of nature. Personal explanation, any agent with intentions, beliefs, and powers. Lecture 3. The rules of evidence. Any proposed explanation, scientific or personal, is judged by two factors: prior probability, above all simplicity, and explanatory power. Does it make the evidence more expected than it would be otherwise? Bayes' theorem wields them together. But last time we ended on a cliffhanger. All those rules tell you how to judge an explanation once one is on the table. They don't tell you yet when you need an explanation at all. When is it rational to say, this has no explanation, it's a brute fact? Full stop. That's today. And notice what hangs on it. The theist claims that the universe is a bad place to stop and God is a good one. That claim is either defensible or it isn't. And this chapter builds the machinery to find out. Start with a preliminary question. The arguments for God all begin with some phenomenon. The universe exists. It has the laws it does. People exhibit consciousness. There are claims to miracles and claims science can't explain that. When could a claim like that ever be justified? Swinburne says candidate phenomena come in exactly two varieties. They're either too odd for science or they're too big. The too odd. Suppose we have a well-confirmed scientific system governing some domain, and then something happens inside that domain, which the system says shouldn't happen. Someone recovers from polio in a minute. A body levitates. Now, you could always patch the science to accommodate the event. But remember the curve-fitting lesson from last time. You can always patch a theory. The question is what the patch cost. If the only amendments that would predict the odd event make the laws grotesquely complicated, the scribble instead of the ellipse, then the rational verdict is this: our simple, well-confirmed laws are true, and this event is a violation. Science doesn't explain it. Whether anything like that ever happens, that's the miracles question, and Swinburne banks it for chapter 12. He'll also argue in chapter 9 that consciousness itself is too odd for science. Not one weird event, a whole kind of thing that the scientific picture can't deliver. They're too big. This one's deeper, and it doesn't depend on anything unusual happening. Think about what scientific explanation is. Initial conditions plus laws. Science explains the state of the world by an earlier state plus the laws. It explains Galileo's laws by Newton's laws, Newton's by Einstein's. Every scientific explanation, by its very shape, presupposes two things: that there are states of affairs and that there are laws. Which means there are two questions science cannot answer even in principle. Not because science is young, but because of what science is. Why are there any states of affairs at all? And why do the most fundamental laws hold? Science can no more explain those than a chess game can explain why there's a board. So, the phenomena that launches the arguments for God, cosmological and most teleological arguments, start from the too big. Most of the others start from the too odd. And notice the shape of the dialectic. If a phenomena has no scientific explanation and no personal explanation in terms of ordinary embodied agents, no hidden prankster with fishing wire, then only two options remain standing. Either a very powerful non-embodied agent explains it, or nothing does. It's brute. Which means everything now turns on one question. When is it's just brute a rational thing to say? Before we can answer that question, we have to clear away the most famous objection in this entire debate. You've heard it, maybe you've made it. The theist says, God explains the universe, and the atheist replies, oh really? Then who made God? If God explains the order of the world, doesn't God's own existence need explaining just as much? Haven't you explained nothing? Just moved the mystery back a step? This is an old and distinguished objection. David Hume presses it in the Dialogues. A mental world, he says, requires a cause just as much as a material world does. And it's a centerpiece of Richard Dawkins' case in our own day. It feels devastating. Swinburne's response is blunt. The objection in this form commits a fallacy. He gives it a name, the completist fallacy. The fallacy is the assumption that F can't explain E unless F is itself explained. Why is that a fallacy? Because if it were true, nothing would ever explain anything. Think it through. The rain explains why the grass is wet. But wait, is the rain explained? The clouds explain the rain. But are the clouds explained? If every explanation is held hostage to the explanation of its explanation all the way up, then nothing counts as explained until everything does. And since nobody has explained everything, science has never explained a single thing. The origin of our galaxy is not fully understood, therefore geology is bunk. That's absurd. So the principle generating it is false. Here's Swinburne's own example, and it's a good one. Jones goes to Monte Carlo and loses his fortune at roulette. Why is Jones broke? Because the wheel spun the way it spun. That's a perfectly good explanation of Jones' ruin. Complete, satisfying, and true. Even though no one on Earth can explain why the wheel landed where it did. The unexplained can still explain. Or picture a freight train. The last car is moving. Why? Because the car ahead of it is moving. That genuinely explains the last car's motion fully. Whether or not you know anything about the car ahead of that one, or the locomotive, or whether there's even one. Explanation is local. It doesn't wait for the whole train to be accounted for. So, who made God as a knockdown refutation fails. If God's existence and intention fully explain the universe, then the universe is explained, period. Even if God's existence has no explanation. The demand that every explainer be explained is a demand nothing could ever meet. Don't let the theist off the hook too fast. A fallacy died just now, but a perfectly good question survives it, and Swinburne is scrupulous about this. It is always legitimate to ask whether the explainer has a further explanation. What's illegitimate is insisting that it must on pain of not explaining. So the right question is never, must the explanans be explained? The right question is, would explaining it further be a net gain? And that reframing cuts both ways. Watch this carefully because it's the pivot of the chapter. The atheist can't refute theism just by chanting who made God. But equally, the theist can't refute atheism just by chanting, why is there a universe? Both sides propose a stopping point. Neither stopping point is ruled out by fiat. The debate is over which stopping point is better. And better is going to be measured by exactly the two factors from last time. The same rule book. No special pleading in either direction. To have that debate properly, though, we need sharper tools. Stopping point is doing a lot of work. Stopping in what sense? Swinburne now builds a ladder. 4 increasingly demanding grades of explanation. And I promise the payoff is worth the terminology. Rung 1. Full explanation. From Lecture 2, an explanation cites a cause C and a reason R. Initial conditions and laws in the scientific case. A person with intentions, beliefs, and powers in the personal case. The explanation is full when C and R together guarantee the outcome. Given them, the event had to happen. The eclipse, positions of Sun, Moon, and Earth, plus Newton's laws, and the eclipse follows as a matter of course. Nothing about the eclipse is left dangling. If your factors merely make the event probable, that's a partial explanation. Fine, but weaker. But notice what full explanation can still leave open. The factors it cites might themselves depend on other things operating right now. Stick moves the stone, but the stick moves only because at that very moment my arm is moving it, which takes us to rung 2, complete explanation. A complete explanation is a full explanation in which every factor cited has no explanation in terms of anything operating at the time. You've followed the change of simultaneous dependence all the way down. The tides explained by the positions of the Sun, Moon, and Earth plus Newton's laws, but Newton's laws hold here now because this region of space is relatively empty and Einstein's laws hold. Keep going until nothing contemporaneous pops up. Einstein's laws, the emptiness of the region, the position of the bodies, and that package is a complete explanation of the tide. Note the fine print. The factors can still have past causes. Something long ago put the moon where it is. Complete explanation only settles the now. Rung 3, ultimate explanation. Now close off the past 2. An ultimate explanation is a complete explanation whose factors have no explanation at all. Not contemporaneous, not historical, not partial, nothing. The factors are ultimate brute facts. Here's the clean example. Suppose there's no God. The universe began with a bang in state X, governed by laws L, and X led to Y, which led to Z, which led to today. Then Z plus L completely explains today, but only X plus L, the very first state plus the laws, ultimately explains it. That's the atheist picture, stated precisely. X and L are the ultimate facts, the initial state and the laws, the last Y's. This is the rung where the God debate lives. Rung 4, absolute explanation. One more rung up, and this is where it gets philosophically spicy. An absolute explanation would be an ultimate explanation with no brute facts at all. Every factor, either logically necessary or self-explanatory. Nothing is left unexplained. Everything is finally accounted for. This is the dream of the rationalist. And Swinburne saws this rung off the ladder. He says it can't be done, not by physics, and listen carefully, not by God either. So why not? Here are 2 short, sharp arguments. First, nothing explains itself. My existing yesterday might help explain my existing today, but my existing today cannot explain my existing today. That's not an explanation, that's a repetition. Second, logical necessity can't birth contingency. A full explanation, remember, guarantees its outcome. The outcome is deducible from it, but you cannot deduce a contingent fact, something that could have been otherwise, from a necessary truth, something that couldn't. 2 plus 2 makes 4 in every possible world. It therefore can't explain why this world exists rather than another, or rather than none. Sit with the consequence, because it's one many believers don't see coming. If God explains the world, God's existence cannot be logically necessary, true the way mathematics is true. A logically necessary God couldn't explain a contingent universe. So Swinburne's God is, in the logical sense, contingent. There might have been no God. He may be necessary in other, weaker senses, We'll talk about those in chapter 5. But the ontological argument's God, the God whose existence is guaranteed by logic alone, is not on offer here. Even on full-strength theism, there is exactly one brute fact. The question of the whole book is whether it's a better brute fact than the atheist. So full, complete, ultimate. The latter tells us what the grades of stopping are. It doesn't yet tell us when a stopping claim is justified. When do we have good grounds for believing the road actually ends here? Swinburne's criterion falls straight out of last lecture's 2 factors. You can state it in one sentence. You are entitled to stop when going further would buy you nothing. When any deeper explanation would give no explanatory power and no prior probability, or would gain one only by losing another. Keep explaining while explaining pays. Stop explaining when it stops. That's it. Not stop when you're tired, not stop when it's convenient for your worldview, stop when the books say there's no net gain to be had. Is this abstract? Completely. So let's watch it operate. 3 cases from the history of science, because Swinburne's whole point is that this is not theology's private rulebook. Scientists apply it constantly, and applying it is part of what makes science rational. All right, let's start with case 1. Let's look at laws. Why did science accept that Newton's laws explained Galileo's law of fall? Net gain, massive. Explanatory power. From 4 simple laws, you get falling bodies, planetary orbits, tides, collisions, prior probability. The laws are stunningly simple. Later, why accept that Einstein's laws explain Newton's? Some cost in simplicity. Einstein's equations are heavier machinery, but enormous gain in power. Light bending, Mercury's orbit, phenomena Newton couldn't touch. Paying a little prior for a lot of power, net gain. Explanation deepens. But now the punchline, and it's the part people miss. Late 18th century physicists concluded that Newton's laws were fundamental, the terminus, the bottom. And Swinburne's verdict is, given their evidence, they were right to think so. The laws were incredibly simple. The leftover phenomena, chemistry, magnetism, looked like they'd yield to one added short-range force law without touching gravity at all. No visible move promised any net gain. Nature and nature's law laid hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. They were wrong, it turned out, but they weren't irrational. A justified stopping claim can be mistaken. This is inductive philosophy. The criterion tells you what's reasonable on your evidence, not what's infallible. Okay, so let's look at case 2, it's good things. The criterion also governs when you may posit a new entity and when you need it. A star wobbles in a way Newton's laws couldn't predict. 2 options. Mangle the laws to fit this one star, or postulate an unseen planet tugging on it. Science postulates the planet every time. Why? Net gain. The laws stay simple, the wobble gets explained, and a planet is a familiar kind of thing. It fits background knowledge. That's how Neptune was found. Predicted from a wobble before any telescope actually saw the planet. But when there's no wobble, when the star's behavior is fully accounted for, science postulates nothing further. Not because further things are forbidden, they wouldn't yield any explanatory advantage. Case 3, the particle zoo in the dream. Chemists explain the teeming variety of substances with about 100 kinds of atoms. Huge gain in power and simplicity. Physicists then chase something better. All atoms built from a few elementary particles. And the 20th century wobbled between triumph and farce. First, just electrons and protons. Very simple, beautiful. Then neutrons, photons, positrons, neutrinos, mesons, muons, the zoo. Then quarks to simplify the zoo. Then several kinds of quarks. Simplicity kept slipping away, which is exactly why physics keeps digging by the criterion that there's still a gain to be had. But now run the thought experiment Swinburne runs. Suppose the early hope had panned out. 2 particle types, equal mass, opposite charge, and every known physical and chemical phenomena predictable from their arrangements. Positing anything deeper would explain nothing further. And could you even imagine a simpler basis? Swinburne practically issues a dare. I defy anyone to describe one. That, he says, is what a justified terminus looks like. We know rock bottom when we see it. Maximal power, unimprovable simplicity, nothing left on the table. Hold that image, because the question coming down the road is whether theism, one being, infinite power, infinite knowledge, perfect freedom, has that same unimprovable shape. Let's take a quick detour. This is optional but fun because a classical tradition thought you could settle all this from the armchair. Aquinas argued there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. Not the back through time kind, but the simultaneous kind. A moving B, moving C, all at once like a hand moving stick, moving stone. The chain, he argued, must terminate, and terminate in God. If he's right, it goes back forever, is off the table a priori, and half of our work is done. Swinburne isn't buying this. Picture an infinitely long freight train. No locomotive, each car pulled by the car ahead forever. Strange? Deeply. But contradictory? Point to the contradiction. Each car's motion is fully explained by the car ahead of it. Remember, explanation is local. And if the argument is, but then the whole train's motion is never explained, that's our old friend, the completist fallacy. So Swinburne refuses the a priori shortcut, even though it points to his own conclusion. And that's worth pausing on, because it really tells you what kind of book this is. No armchair proof rules out infinite regress. No armchair proof rules out facts. Stopping points have to be earned, case by case, with the net gain criterion. The slow road is the only road. One loose end, then the reveal. The criterion is fully general. It governs personal explanation too, and you already use it there. Why did she open the door? To go out. Why go out? To reach the mailbox. To mail the letter. And there, she intended to mail a letter. You stop. One plan level intention explains the door, the stairs, the street, the stamp. You don't posit a deeper intention behind it, because deeper buys nothing. No added power, no added simplicity. In everyday psychology, we reach justified stopping points constantly. Wildest intentions and basic powers, and last lecture's poltergeist rule still stands. As few agents as possible, with the most general intentions possible. One poltergeist, not 12. Now the reveal, the chapter's quiet bombshell. Remember from lecture 2, scientific and personal explanation are rivals on the same level. Neither reduces to the other. But here's what that levelness implies. Each can explain the existence and operation of the factors the other cites. Run it one direction. Science explaining persons. A scientific story, evolution, neuroscience, explaining how beings with intentions, beliefs, and powers came to exist at all. That project has a name, physicalism. Now run it in the other direction. A person explaining science. An agent whose intention explains why there are initial conditions at all, why laws hold at all, the two too big questions from part 1. The ones science structurally can't touch. That project also has a name, theism. Look at what just happened. Physicalism and theism are not a science versus superstition matchup. They are mirror image research programs. The same move run in opposite directions, each trying to make the other's primitives its theorems, and therefore judged, both of them, by the same two-factor test. Which one, at the end of the day, delivers more explanatory power from a simpler base? That framing is worth the price of the whole chapter. Whatever you conclude, you can never again say the two proposals aren't even the same kind of thing. Okay, so let's gather up. Science can't explain the too odd. Events its own best laws forbid. Or the too big, why there are states of affairs at all, and why the deepest laws hold. Those are the launch pads of the arguments to come. Who made God as a refutation commits the completist fallacy. The unexplained can still explain the roulette wheel and the freight train, but the honest question survives. Is further explanation a net gain? Explanation comes in grades, full, complete, ultimate, and the top rung, absolute explanation, with no brute facts at all, is unreachable for everyone. Nothing explains itself. Necessity can't explain contingency. Even the theist ends with one brute fact: God. The net gain criterion tells you when stopping is earned. Stop when depth stops pain. In power or in prior. It's the rule that crowned Newton, found Neptune, and keeps physics digging under the quirks. And it's the rule, the only rule, by which the universe just is and God just is will be scored against each other. And physicalism and theism stands revealed as mirror images, rival attempts to explain each other's starting points under one shared standard. So the table is set. Next time, Chapter 5, the hypothesis of theism itself. What exactly is being claimed when we say God exists? Why infinite power, infinite knowledge, perfect freedom, and why does Swinburne think that hypothesis has the same unimprovable simplicity as the two-particle dream? That's where infinity is simple stops being a curiosity and starts carrying the whole case. Until then, here's a question for the comments, and I want honesty from both camps. Where do you stop and why there? If you're an atheist, when you say the universe just exists, no reason, is that a stopping point you've earned by Swinburne's criterion, or just where you happen to get off the train? If you're a theist, what makes God just exist a better terminus than the universe just exists? Can you say it without special pleading? Both answers from each side get pinned. I'd love to hear where you land. If this is useful, hit subscribe. Chapter 5 is where Swinburne finally puts his cards on the table. I'll see you next time.